Yeah, really grateful for everybody who's here and joined in today. And as this is titled, it's No Theater Major, No Problem. Though if there are any theater majors in the mix who are joining or watching in the future, hopefully there will be something that is applicable to you too. But just going to give a little bit of background in addition to what was shared in that very gracious intro. I was class of 2011 at William & Mary. I was a film studies major and a French minor, so very much not in the theater world other than being a massive theater enthusiast and was going to see every production at PBK and had friends who were involved, but was very much not kind of my world or what I was doing while I was there. But I moved to New York to start grad school at NYU. I did a master's in cinema studies. And while I was in New York, was taking advantage of the fact that suddenly had all of those doors of that theater world and could wait in a rush line every morning for tickets and could really sort of become immersed in what was going on there. So that really sort of opened my eyes and piqued my interest to how that sort of enthusiasm and fandom could turn into something else. So my first summer between grad school was looking for jobs, was actually on the Playbill job sort of board, which we'll talk about at the end of this, and was scrolling through things. And there was a producer who was looking for uh, someone to join her team just for the summer. Her name was Harriet Levy. She was working on this show, Anne, that you see up on the screen here, which is a one-woman show about Texas Governor Ann Richards. So I submitted my resume, went in for this interview, and it turned out to be a really lovely symbiotic relationship because they saw that film background on my resume and said, we would love to have you on board. We're trying to pitch some film and TV projects, and we'll kind of show you the ropes of all the theater stuff. It also so happened that there was a fellow William & Mary alum named Jennifer Isaacson, who remains a dear, wonderful friend who was in that office and knew that piqued her interest of seeing William & Mary on the resume. So was very grateful for that. So I spent a summer really learning the ropes and kind of becoming exposed to this theater world. And there were all these things being talked about of investors and co-producers and lead producers and company managers, all of which was sort of a foreign language to me. And I would either kind of ask the right questions or try to slyly go Google or look something up on the fly and tried to sort of make my way through this initial internship where I was sort of doing what was familiar and editing some video and doing things like that for them, but really learning and immersing myself in all of the rest of it on the fly. That then, when I graduated and needed something that was a little more real, they introduced me to their general management office, which we'll talk about who all those people are a little bit more down the line. They were working on a revival of Annie, which you see there in 2012. And I sort of was there with them. And again, they were embracing me for sort of a jack of all trades sort of perspective of, they wanted me to do some ticketing to help with some marketing stuff, to do a lot of hospitality and tour guiding at the theater, some video work in the theater, and really just sort of being willing to play up a lot of different things of my background and say yes to a lot of things worked out really well. This last show, which you'll see is mentioned as the 50 Shades of the 90s, quote unquote, was a musical adaptation of The Bridges of Madison County, which came into my life because that production of Annie closed, as sadly Broadway shows are wont to do. And I was thinking, okay, I'm jobless, where am I headed? And those general managers who had taken me in and given me this job said, hey, there's this co-producer, Stacy Mindich, who has worked on Annie. She's about to start lead producing her own shows. Again, those are terms we'll kind of talk through later on. Do you want to go meet with her? And you should go talk to her. And it turned out she wanted someone in-house to work on Bridges of Madison County, to come up with sort of crazy marketing ideas, to do the essentially like cold calling of group sales, cold calls, to try to drum up groups to come see this show that people were a little skeptical of maybe. I had a lot of phone calls with like cantankerous old ladies who said they wouldn't bring all their friends to see the adultery show, which wasn't entirely unfair. But anyway, so was on Bridges of Madison County, was doing all sorts of work in that respect. And that also, as shows are wont to do, even more quickly than something like Annie, unfortunately closed. Beautiful show, couldn't find its life on Broadway. And I was again thinking, okay, am I going to be jobless or figuring out where I'm headed next. And Stacy, this producer I was working for, had said, well, there's this new thing coming along and it's coming up the pipeline. And I'm not sure what it's going to be, but I hope it will turn into something. It didn't even have a title at the time. It is what's now Dear Evan Hansen, and that has been my job for about 8 years now, and will be a lot of the kind of the examples I pull from within this while we're talking today. But anyway, that is just a little bit of background. And actually sort of the structure of what we're going to talk through today is actually taking a walk through what's called the Playbill Vault. And what it is, if you haven't been to it, it is a really great resource for reading up on past, current, future shows that might be of interest to you, that have resonated with you, that you think are in the vein of something you would like to work on. And where it used to be that unless you were physically in that theater and leaving with the item in hand, it you didn't really have access to all those credits and all those information, all the fine print, if you will, the equivalent of like staying through the credits at the movies, of seeing the broad scope of everybody who's working on these productions, A, to be in awe of what they're doing, and B, to think of the many, many avenues as you're trying to seek out those jobs, a first job or an internship or an opportunity and or connection. And it's really kind of a great resource and a great framework for today. So that's what it'll look like when you go to the site, and you can look up pretty much any production. And we're going to actually start here with the title page, again, just using Dear Evan Hansen as this example. And as I say here, these names, the cast names are going to change a lot. You're going to see opening night credits and sort of a way a show was frozen in time when it began. But a lot of those other people that you see and can use as a resource are going to be in it for the long haul of the life of a show and what, an interest in what they're doing next. So all of these other people, which are who we're going to talk about today. The first thing that you'll see there is the theater owner, which they're essentially sort of the landlord who grants a show a home and gives them life and works with a producer to get something started and off the ground. And these are sort of the four main names that are really worth knowing. They really are sort of the four primary landlords of Broadway, so to speak. That's a picture of our theater, the Music Box there. We work with the Schubert organization, but these four others are really worth knowing, even if you're just trying to sort of dive into that world and know who the key players are and not make a funny face when certain names are said aloud by someone you're trying to work with, which I'm sure I probably had some of those moments earlier in the day. And that last one, you see ATG, they're actually UK based. We work with them in the UK on Dear Evan Hansen, but they're starting to have kind of more of a presence in the US too, and are a big name in the equation. So of course, all of those groups we touched on, we're not going to really talk in depth. Their sites and their teams, they have these vast teams of people who work in finance and admin and marketing and special events and all of these doors that have been open and hopefully will start opening again as things are gearing up again in the theater world. But if nothing else, just four really good names to make sure sort of in the back of your mind as you're talking and researching. Then you've got the groups of the producers. And you'll see there's many names that were there, and we're going to talk about sort of the distinction of who they are and why it's good to be connected with them. I'm very fortunate that I've worked for a number of years with Stacy, who you'll see mentioned up top, and is our lead producer on Dear Evan Hansen, and she was the same on The Bridges of Madison County, and that's the person who is really taking charge and being that primary force behind the production. They maybe had the idea, or they commissioned the idea, or they sort of brought together the creative team or embraced an artist, and then they try to bring this team around them to bring it to life, in addition to all those co-producers. So all these bios that you'll sort of see in the background are the co-producers who come aboard, and they might not be making the daily decisions about what's going on with a show, or making the budgeting or marketing decisions, but they are coming to meetings to sort of give ideas and to contribute, and they're helping make sure that there's a chunk of capital that's there for the show too, whether that's through their own means or through bringing on board investors or things like that. And obviously the bigger the show and the bigger the money or the capitalization, there'll be more co-producers in that mix. So it's kind of important to know that distinction if you're looking at who to try to reach out or network or connect to. because all of those co-producers, it's very likely that they've got, these things that they've involved with by bringing on board investors and kind of giving that financial vote of confidence. But a lot of them, they do aspire to have their own projects that they're lead producing and that they're spearheading. And those types of names are really building up offices and teams around them. So that part is really good to keep in mind as you're sort of looking at who's doing what. And at the end of this, we'll talk about sort of how to see and keep tabs on who's doing what. But speaking from experience of being in one of those lead producing offices that has a lot of, has a team that's been growing, and we have a lot of contact from students or recent graduates or people who want to reach out and inquiring about opportunities. And half the time that happens, we unfortunately might not have anything. Half the time, or a quarter of the time, we say that's really intriguing, we're going to save their resume and remember it. And sometimes they could sort of send just the right thing or just the right resume and connect with us, and we think, hey, we actually want to talk to this person, and maybe they are filling an upcoming need that we're thinking about and mindful of. So researching those people through LinkedIn, through their websites, a lot of them, they do have, they're very active on social, and being informed about their work and what they're doing and what they have a direct hand in, and what they've supported. And you'd be surprised that a lot really are willing to sort of embrace and talk to you if you're wanting to come into that fold, or maybe even have opportunities within their office. And a lot of times opportunities that don't even reach the job boards or the public postings or the things like that, because there's always sort of such an influx of people who make that direct outreach. So knowing who those people are is super helpful for sure. And I'd say that this time of the COVID era has proven all the more why that kind of no theater major, no problem mantra applies, because everybody's mindful of the skill sets that they want to bring into their offices, and the people who are, technologically supporting them, and with webinars and digital events and video content and everything like that, that producers are sort of thinking about in-house in addition to the teams they work with. So all of those skill sets, special event planning is something we've always paid attention to, people with a strong social background, which is, ever changing. And I feel like 9 years ago, I was the person in the room that would be turned to and said, what do you think about that? And now it's, often even our intern who's in the room or at the table, and has a whole different sensibility of sort of their peers and what's connecting with certain groups. So all of that is sort of what we've looked for on resumes beyond just the sort of traditional majors or academic routes that you might think about. So all really worth keeping in mind. Also just going to touch really briefly on the regional theater, or the sort of not-for-profit partner. And here listed are the two that we worked with on Dear Evan Hansen. And we had Arena Stage, which is in Washington, DC, and is an incredible, incredible first home that we had. And the Second Stage Theater, that's an off-Broadway venue there in New York. And just playing up both of those, especially Arena, and thinking about Arena, if we have any Virginia, William and Mary folks who are watching this now or later, is such a resource and an asset. And I think I mostly want to talk about them because I think in some students I've talked to, there's always the sense of, oh, if I don't have that New York credit on my resume, as I'm trying to finally sort of maybe dip my toe in that water, it's not going to mean as much, or it's going to sort of look like I've been missing something without having taken that New York internship and slept on someone's couch or done all of that. And a lot of that is necessary, but really looking at these venues close to home, those are the two we performed at. And something to think about is this League of Resident Theaters in particular, or LORT, and looking through their website. I have a little glimpse of it here of who all of their member theaters are, but they're all across the country. I believe it's actually in 75 members in 29 states, who are all these theaters that in many instances are even a direct line to Broadway and to these producers who are, operating and making their offices there. So just playing up also that sort of remembering to look closer to home carries a lot of weight. And we've seen that in our office too, with the people who come to us and have had an amazing experience for a summer or two in their hometown with their regional theater there, that's sort of making a massive impact in their community, and where they've also had a really amazing hands-on experience. So not going to talk super in depth about them there, but worth sort of looking and becoming familiar with who they all are. Also going to talk briefly about the designers and sort of what the changing opportunities we've sort of seen and experienced there are, because obviously these design teams who are working on a show have a highly skilled group of individuals from a certain background who are supporting them in their direct onstage efforts. But there's also this whole wide team that a lot of them are building around them in their offices to sort of build up their own presence and persona, and sort of expanding into other worlds and other industries. And I'm using our incredible scenic designer, David Corrins, just as a one example, who he's worked with us on Dear Evan Hansen. He's had a lot of amazing other projects, from award shows to TV shows, concerts, all of the above. And it's been really interesting to see sort of how his team has grown and what skill sets he's been embracing, especially as he and other designers are looking to make their mark on stage, but make their mark sort of in a wider social online world too, so people can really sort of experience their work in many forms. And we've got a little glimpse of that here, of just sort of a snippet of his Instagram. You'll see this with a lot of designers who are working these days. And of course, there are some who still very much operate in sort of the one-man band, or them with their design teams. But then at the same time, there are designers out there who are looking to grow their teams with videographers and copywriters and graphic designers, and people who can sort of create all this amazing content and supplementary material alongside them. And seeing offices like David's and others, so worth reaching out and following and being familiar and having that direct outreach, especially thinking about people in the film world with that video experience, editing experience, design experience, all really things that are being looked for. And I think things that are sort of growing organically after the right people sort of reaching out to the right creatives who they really admire and connect to. And even if you don't have the chops to be a scenic designer, a lighting designer, or that's not where you're headed, there are so many incredible opportunities. And there was a amazing team member who I was even working with in this office on things in tandem with our show too, and sort of collaborating directly with all those who have a direct hand on the show. So there's a lot to explore there for sure. And when we talk about those teams who have the direct hand in the show, a lot of them really are these agencies, especially when it comes to sort of the day-to-day life of the show and how they're existing once a show has gotten off the ground and it's running and it needs to continue to find its audience. So I've listed 3 of ours here that we really talk to on a daily basis, even while we are on hiatus and on pause due to COVID, but figuring out how to stay engaged with our audience. It's really been never more important than ever. And so I've listed just a few of these key names here that are some of the main players to really know. Again, 4 of them we work with directly on Dear Evan Hansen. Others are, wonderful colleagues and collaborators. And their offices are, again, one of the most amazing places to look, especially if you're wanting to come into theater from a more varied background, or from film, marketing, English majors, writers, creative writing types. All of that is so being embraced by these agencies that are, expanding their work in theater daily and in so many other spheres of film, TV, live events as well. So it's really a great place to look. And a lot of times they as well have gotten to the point where a lot of the opportunities they have are going to exist sort of directly in their orbit of their sites or their newsletters, or those who are connected with them, and they get snapped up that they're not even necessarily sort of broadcast more widely. So sort of being in the know of who they are and what they're up to. And they, work so collaboratively with everyone else involved with the show too. So like the snow globe that you see on the screen was in Times Square. They were actually called show globes. And they appeared, I guess, Christmas 2019 in the middle of Times Square. About 4 or 5 different productions had them. And that scenic designer, David Corrins, who I just mentioned, did that in collaboration with our office and the producing team and the marketing team and the social team and all of the above. And it's all sort of intermingled more and more these days. So again, some good notes of the folks to sort of be mindful of and connected to. And one other thought as you're thinking about that is these agencies, if they bring you aboard, a lot of them will come in and I experienced this in my role within a producing office too, and will say to you, what's really spoken to you, what stopped you in your tracks in the internet. And it's such an interesting thing in a world that's supposed to be sort of so ephemeral and fleeting, and things can be that flash in the pan, and yet these are the places that really expect the things to have sort of made a mark in your mind. So I am just going to show a few examples of, I've started doing this several years ago. I know a lot of my colleagues have done as well, of keeping these sort of inspiration vaults of anything that sort of catches your eye, a tone within copywriting that you really like, a compelling video concept, something design wise that you could see, wanting to manipulate for future, and really having that built up, because I've seen within these agencies and meetings I've had with them and their interns and their associates, they will look to you and say, for specifics of what brands and what voices, and big and small and all across the board. So this is just one example of, actually it's a sort of crazy, weird jumble of things Pinterest board that I've had going for about 5 years running. And it's sometimes not super intuitive. It's searchable in different ways with certain keywords and whatnot. But colleagues and I all have these things like this, that if we're sitting in a meeting with our digital content team talking about a show, we'll dive back into things like that, saving and bookmarking within Instagram. We even get so specific as to keep these like super involved shared spreadsheets of stuff that, anyway, it's a worthwhile thing to start thinking about if that's kind of a world that you would want to operate or work within someday, and kind of having that backlog of things that really have struck you and inspired you, or that you would want to sort of adapt or use as a jumping off point. So kind of worth thinking about, especially if you want to reach out to some of the agencies like that to try to connect. And then, was talking about the writers in the midst, obviously the copywriting, copy editing element. So many amazing team members that we've worked with and have sort of gotten their starts up through the ranks of these agencies and press offices are the English majors, the people who at first thought they were pre-law, or all these different avenues that have really been embraced and sort of jumped into the world of entertainment at large, of course, but especially in this theater world. So just kind of throwing in a few of those examples, that if that is how you're inclined and you have that ability, every little thing that seems so simple and intuitive, from these numerous press releases to website copy, which unfortunately in the nature of the past year, we've had to do a lot of really communicating and being frank and open and honest with our audience, and realizing how all of that is so integral to the life of these shows and these productions, who have such an ongoing relationship with their audience over the course of many years. So all of those things are so valued. And if you have clips and examples of anything, if you've worked on events like this festival or other live events through William and Mary, and have had to work on materials like that, and public facing writing, whether it's even just social copy, have some examples like that here, with our design team that we've come up with, and all of that you really sort of mine from your experience in your college years, or the things of your extracurriculars and the things that mean the most to you, and making sure that you really save and mine all of that, and can tout your skills and can back it up with sort of the things that you've done and spearheaded that mean a lot to you, no matter how big or how small, can really sort of be pertinent, and is something that we're sort of looking for on the regular, for sure. And I know that's true of a lot of colleagues across many spheres. Also, we touched a little bit, but it found more and more, especially over the course of the past year, that anyone who has those film chops, any of you who are sort of here in the festival and are so inclined, and how to shoot and how to edit and how to have that visual eye, we knew it even before we hit this past year of COVID, that that's the way that these shows and these productions that live in a specific place are connecting with these global audiences that are so much wider than who might ever actually sit in those seats. And that's really only grown over the course of this year of COVID, of these shows realizing that whatever they're able to put out is their truly only line of communication with anyone in their audiences right now. And if anyone, I think the video editors we collaborate with have been busier than ever, and they have, been really coveted for their skills and for their ability and their sort of ability to be nimble and swift and adaptive in these crazy times, with all of the live events that are taking place, and shows trying to sort of put out compelling, different, striking content in this weird moment, and all of the above. So I found that, if anything, in the offices that I've connected with over the past 8 or 9 years now, that it's been having that kind of background, and not necessarily even being the one who's sitting at the computer, but being the one who's going to converse with those teams, and have the visual eye and be able to come in and work on content like that, is so hugely valued by all sorts of offices, and is something that really should be played up and talked up, and putting your abilities and skills out there, because there are people who are really going to want to snap that up for sure, and people who can sort of converse smartly and in an informed way with an artistic eye with those teams, really means a lot. Now, a few more kind of specific tips about those agencies that we were talking about, and some of those names I had put out there earlier, is it really is so worth it. They, above all, as you see kind of in any of these tech companies or agencies across the sphere of industries, they're really all about their sort of their company culture, and those who are really adopting their way of working and their values, and who they are even before they get in that door. And some of the best ways people I've talked to one-on-one and they've expressed interest is going to all of their sites, making sure you're signed up for their newsletters. Because half the time, any opportunities that they're going to put out there, they might put on social to their own connections, and then they're going to put through their newsletter to the people who have already been in their orbit. So making sure that you go seek out some of those names, or the names that you find affiliated with productions and work that have really spoken to you, and making sure, and you're following them on social as well. That's where you'll sort of get a glimpse into special events that they're hosting. And even now, as we're virtual as we are for something like this with the festival, a lot of those events are all the more accessible than they would ever normally be. So it is sort of the perfect time, where it would maybe have been 2 years ago, 50 people gathering in a event room at Google or something to have these conversations. Now it's everyone who is convening online, and they're willing to open those doors up a little bit to share that knowledge and sort of give insight into who they are. So just a big thing, if that's sort of possibly of interest in the back of your mind, and even if you're a few years out from graduation, you're looking for internships, you want to grow familiar with them, starting that now is so hugely valuable for sure. And one kind of subset of these agencies we've touched on is the event planner. Oftentimes they're the opening night coordinator. And it's such a weird sort of best kept secret within the theater world that has become sort of the in and the first step for so many people. And this name was the incredible woman who is sort of a legend and has worked on ours with Dear Evan Hansen, but there are so many equivalent within different firms and offices and agencies within New York. And they're kind of have become shockingly the entry point to so much, because you'll see in some of these pictures, these teams who work these events are huge, and they're more than any of these companies would need to ever really have on staff or on their teams on a regular basis. But they call in the troops for these events that in a normal year with Broadway openings, you get to the point where there's maybe 2 or 3 a week. And these core groups get built up who, are theatrically savvy, but they're also discreet and welcoming and hospitable. And it's such an amazing in. And, sometimes it's through direct connections of saying, hey, you should talk to so-and-so and get on this team. And other times it really is just people who manage to reach out to those agencies or make contact and say, or to the management offices, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But if there are shows on the horizon and you're the savvy person who goes in and says, I know you have an opening coming up in 2 to 3 months, how can I support your team? You'd be surprised how quickly people are embraced. And then they, show their skills and they're appreciated, and they become an intern, or they become sort of a regular team member at these offices. But again, looking forward towards normal years resuming, and the opening nights, the sort of cocktail hour luncheons that are associated with all of the theater awards and things that happen, big anniversaries for long running shows. It's this core team that gets in the door and then is sort of constantly having these connections and networking. So as things gear up again and there's talk about things sort of reopening and resuming, if you're in that position of trying to delve into that world, that's an in that people don't really think about as often, but has led to so many opportunities, including for dear friends of mine who are seen in some of these pictures and have gone on to roles from that that were more permanent and long term. So it's kind of the weird hidden secret. Plus, you work a lot of cool events in really obscure, unexpected places, which is kind of awesome too. Um, One of the other things, and it's falling later here because we're sort of following that playbill structure we've been walking through, but is actually so hugely connected, and sort of the producing office's right hand essentially are the general managers and the company manager, which I didn't really know what that meant when I had that first theater internship and was trying to sort of learn. And that general manager, they really are the right hand for the producer. This is ours that we've worked with. They were also my first employer back in those days when I worked on Annie. They're truly incredible. They're one of many offices like this in New York. And these teams that are involved are really based off of people who have come from so many backgrounds and types of experiences, whether there's legal team members, there's people who worked in finance, there's people who are brought on purely because they're the sort of experts in contracting and all these different elements, and they do have PAs and interns in their mix and everything too. But they're one of the most sort of amazing, like, melting pots of incredible backgrounds that will all convene in these New York offices, and they'll usually have 4 or 5 shows under the umbrella of their office at any given time too that they're working on and involved with. And having gotten a start in an office like that, even though moving to New York, I didn't even really know what such a thing was, quickly realized was probably the most valuable experience you can have to quickly learn all sides of what's going on with a show, because they are the ones hiring every designer, team member, actor, um, a crew member, everyone across the board. They're helping engage with the theater owner. They're helping work with ticketing and bring on board the various agencies that you're going to work with as a show. And they have this huge, vast wealth of knowledge of everything that sort of preceded you, of the shows they've worked on and their experiences. And so that office is sort of the most frantic and crazy and overwhelming and wonderful experience you can ever work in. A lot of them, it varies a little bit these days, but a lot of them still are a little bit more low key. And you're not going to find them with a flashy website or a huge online presence, or a few of them have tried to kind of dabble in having their intern make them visible in the world of social, but really they're sort of operating in the getting their work done and doing their business. And so knowing how to reach them, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, is again such a hugely valuable thing. And they're one of those other offices that you can always contact, and it might seem sort of cold and out of the blue, but if they have 4 or 5 productions coming up in a season, and you're a well-spoken, diligent, hard worker who emails them and says, I know you have all this on your plate, is there anything I can even come in and assist with on a part-time basis while you have these openings impending? You'd be surprised how quickly they will sort of try to take you up on that or take a closer look at that. And again, we'll talk about sort of the how to get in touch with them in just a second. A couple of the other things to sort of play up if you're going to try to do that. I know that when I was sort of talking myself through some of those first jobs and not having that quote unquote sort of theater major background that might be sort of the first obvious in the door coming out of certain programs from Columbia and Michigan and Carnegie Mellon and these places that sort of there's always this pipeline. Being able to draw upon some of those William and Mary experiences were so hugely valuable. I've got AMP here. I worked with them for 4 years, was executive director my last year. That experience was like crazy and overwhelming and wonderful. And so much of what I've drawn upon since then, especially in those first years of sort of trying to prove your chops of anything you've done with budgeting, scheduling, contracting, working with agents, advertising. Um, we work closely with student assembly. They're doing the same thing. Any organization that is, putting together your own budget and trying to get funding approved for your year and making things happen that mean a lot to you, all of that translates into this experience that's really going to mean the most to these offices, and something you should really think about. Um, Thinking about those experiences, the other person we haven't talked about yet specifically is that company manager, and they work within that bigger management office, but um, they sort of become like the mother or father hen to whatever production they're assigned to. And they, unlike the managers sort of above them who hire them, they do only work on one show, and they deal with payroll for the show and paying the show's bills and keeping that all up to speed, but also dealing with actors and sick day and leaves of absences and feeding the company during long rehearsals and dealing with dressing rooms and all of that. And you get a company manager on the road with a touring production, and they're doing all the more because they're dealing with hotels and travel and camaraderie on the road. And one of the most apt actually connections is like RAs and res life, which is a huge factor at William and Mary with so many on campus. It's a huge factor everywhere on colleges, but have been so surprised how often that's been played up with company managers who come into the fold, and they didn't necessarily have a theater background, but they knew they operated well in this world of taking care of people and building community and looking after people. So that's another factor. It's not something that I had in my experience, but I had the experience of really appreciating those who did it for me in 3 of these dorms that are depicted here for the sake of nostalgia while at William and Mary. So just another sort of hugely valuable experience to think about and draw upon as you're looking for those roles and those ins, and those company managers, especially again when a show's about to open, are usually always looking for support and backup to go through the rehearsal process and the opening night process and all of those moments where they might not have a long-term job for you, but they're going to have the thing that can sort of become your start and get you in the door, and you impress them, and then they're going to sort of pass you on to the next production who needs someone to step in and support in that way, and then and sort of and so on until you land into a role that's actually yours. So again, something really worth thinking about, especially if you've got that sort of background. One of the last things we're going to talk about is the merch team, and I probably would have never imagined how much time we actually spend talking about the merchandise connected with a production and how it becomes all in one part of marketing. It's part of the economics of a show. It's part of a show's philanthropic efforts a lot of the time. And those offices, I've got ours listed here, and they're wonderful, and you can go research that there's a number of them out there, are always looking for team members as well, and team members who come from all numbers of backgrounds, and they've worked in design or in merchandising or in retail or in programming and building as e-commerce has grown and has grown all the more in a year like this. They're a really interesting avenue to look at too. We have just one little look of some of the things we've created in recent years with our team at Creative Goods that we work with. Most recently, sadly, the Dear Evan Hansen face mask that you'll see up there in the corner. A lot of shows have been working in the same realm. And, it's something that might seem a little bit like second nature, but actually the people who have had that sort of experience, and a lot of times you get that from these years in your college years and the organizations you're connected with and what you're doing to sort of build community within those organizations and raise funds for them and all of the above. As sort of a trip down memory lane, I pulled out just a few things that even still exist in a drawer I still have from my William and Mary days. And all of that are sort of really fun, nostalgic memories, but they're also representative of all that hugely valuable experience I had sort of from those first years of helping design and budget and purchase and retail and sell all these items through these clubs and groups I was involved with. And all the stuff that just sort of feels commonplace while you're at it is actually hugely valued by those companies that do such a thing within the theater world as their bread and butter, and it's a hugely, you know, lucrative one. And also for those producers who want to work with that, and they want to you know, make the most of that, and they want to do special internal things for their companies and their productions as well. So they're skills to not really take for granted or to undervalue, for sure. Um, just a couple of last final tips that are sort of more broad. One, if you think you have an interest in this world and you haven't already, if you're not getting the daily Broadway briefing emails, you are definitely missing out. It's free unless you do sort of their pro service, which isn't even necessary, but it's like the skim of the theater world, or any one of the numbers of sort of news aggregator newsletters that come out in the morning. And especially if you're sort of a new enthusiast to this world who doesn't know all the key players, but you want to get there and you want to sort of absorb it and start now, this is the place. And it's kept going throughout the entirety of the shutdown. Even this is today's that our office got, that I'm sort of scrolling through here quickly. But it's all the headlines, it's all the happenings, it's regional happenings, it's London happenings, it's, you know, what's going on with tours, what's going on with theater owners and venues being bought and sold. And then at the bottom, you'll see there's even a whole list of upcoming events and industry events and streaming things, and it's all compiled for you in one place. So whether you're already sort of in the know or you're just wanting to absorb it a little bit more, that's the place you should go, like right after this ends, and make sure you're there. This is a look at some of the pro content they do, which is interesting but not necessary. But you know, we'll give you the upcoming productions and who the lead producer is, which we've talked about sort of earlier here. It'll also give you a look at sort of the social stats, which is you know, fascinating and really sort of can make you want to pull your hair out sometimes, but it can also is like hugely valuable to see what general theater going audiences are relating to at any given time. So that is some of the pro content that's there too, and is worth thinking about. We've talked a lot about here about the who's and finding who those people are with these upcoming productions or existing productions, or, you know, things that are in the pipeline. The Internet Broadway Database, it's basically like IMDb of the theater world. The Broadway League, that's like the main trade organization, they keep it up to date. It is pretty good as well, especially once things are up and running, of telling you who all those key players are and who you should be going to dig a little bit deeper and be on their sites or on their newsletters, or you know, engaging with them on social and really getting to know them before you try to approach them. There's also the Theatrical Index, which that one will give you a little bit more of what's upcoming and who's got it in the works, and who a producer or a manager has already hired, and who you can maybe contact about trying to get that first foot in the door. That you do have to pay for, although if you sort of make your list and then you dive in and do the weekly free trial, you can mine a lot from it even then. But another really valuable resource that gets tapped a lot. And we did talk about this Playbill job site, and I mentioned that's where I actually found my first internship that I'd applied for. And it is really worth looking at. And even now in this weird time of hiatus, there's been a lot of activity there, and especially a lot of activity percolating as people are looking to sort of gear up again and to revive and looking towards the future. So it's totally worthwhile to keep tabs on and to check back with regularly. And like our office has posted internships there. If we ever go out publicly to post, that is the place we go. But that said, be aware that a lot of the things won't ever even make it that far. They'll get snapped up before you dive in there, and it's by people who have, you know, connected directly with those people, those managers, those offices, who have seen something in their newsletter and sort of gotten the early lead on it that way. So that's sort of your backup to round it all off, but shouldn't be your end and be all of where you're looking for such things. And I know that's been a lot, and it's crazy of not even really getting to see who's on here. So I'm going to stop screen sharing now and just see if there are any questions that people are welcome to ask.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caitlin. If you have any questions, feel free to just put them in the chat or raise your hand or unmute and ask them. I can start off with one.
Absolutely.
What does like a typical day on the job look like, both like as you're getting ready for a show to open and then as it's running?
It's a great question for sure, and it does change a whole lot in the getting ready to open days. And I think a lot of people are going to be experiencing those days again, because any show that's even relaunching is going to kind of consider it that way of their sort of starting almost fresh. It really is a lot about engaging with the teams and the companies and the stage managers, and helping do whatever you can do to support rehearsal, finding ways to, also capture content or memorialize that rehearsal process that isn't going to be intrusive and disrupt anybody, and sort of acting as a liaison between the different agencies and ad teams and everyone there who's working in that way. Um, and so it's a lot of that, and it can be sort of long hours, especially once you get into the tech process and you're on stage and the cast is there rehearsing sometimes late into the night, and you're there to sort of support that process and be a liaison and help sort of connect the various members of the team. When a show has been up and running for a while, a lot of times it really is, the creative side of things sort of, it does what it does, and you bring new actors in and new performers in, but the stage managers sort of handle that, and it's an amazing sort of usually smoothly running operation. And the producing team on the back end is meeting with all of those agencies and the digital marketing team and the ad team and the press team about, everything possible and engaging to sort of keep that fire alive and stoke those flames of interest, especially as, years go on. And in normal circumstances we would have been celebrating 5 years on Broadway this December. So it's being mindful of what you do, and how you sort of keep that interest alive even when there's maybe 20 other shows opening in a given year. So it's sort of planning those events and those anniversaries and those sort of partnerships. With Dear Evan Hansen, we have a lot of mental health partners, so we engage with them pretty often too. They sort of have connected with us based on the subject matter of our show, and we find ways to sort of tie all the threads together and get them connected with our artists and our cast members and with our social teams, and to try to make exciting things and events and operations happen there. So it means it can be a lot of meetings, and these days it's a lot of Zoom and a lot of calls and a lot of trying to keep that flame burning on the back end, so we're ready when it's time to press go again and get things restarted. Thanks, Emma.
Yeah, thank you. We got a couple in the chat. So from Meg, for those who aren't English or film majors, how do you recommend conveying the strengths of your field of study? Is it still as possible to enter the field?
Yes, absolutely. So I probably, when talking, was using English as sort of a shorthand, but I think anybody with those strong writing skills in particular are so hugely valued. The writing skills, the presentation skills, anything like that is going to be huge, especially when many of these offices are so about communication and interconnection, and making sure that you're a good, respectful, responsible sort of leader and liaison to all the other teams that are looking to you in a producing office. But that's true of any other kind of office you could look to also. So you're right, I sort of went to the shorthand of talking of a couple ways, but I think that is huge. And I think a lot of it stems from the extracurriculars and sort of or the co-curriculars of what have gone alongside your experience, whether that's in your department, but you've helped spearhead events or communications, either internally or externally, anything like that, actually managing a social presence or an online presence, whether it's for a department or a club or an organization. Any of that sort of thing is so hugely valued. And I touched upon kind of AMP and having worked for the film festival and a couple things like that were true to my world. But I know that as we see resumes and colleagues see resumes, anybody who has the tangible thing of, hey, I've pulled this off, whether it's a conference or a live event in the sciences or whatever that may be, especially in that live event sphere, people are going to realize the undertaking of what you've pulled off. And in these days, having pulled off, a virtual event as well, and sort of helped maneuver those moments. And I think everyone's mindful of how that's going to stay a part of our reality, even alongside when we sort of return to normal, whatever that may look like. So that's another thing worth considering for sure. That's a good question. And I'd say yes, absolutely, still possible for sure. And if anything, that cover letter is going to be one of the most crucial things, because you do see a lot that are from people who are really creative and exuberant, and and express themselves, but not necessarily in the way that like a William and Mary student can, with a really well crafted cover letter, a well researched cover letter, that shows you're knowing what you're talking about. You didn't just sort of copy and paste, and all of that really does mean a lot and resonate truly. Speaking as someone who has read a lot also in recent years, so good luck.
Awesome. Let's see, from Steve, how many auditions actually result in getting a small part?
It's a really good question, and I can't speak as directly as someone like a casting office, who we didn't talk about them, but obviously they're their own sort of amazing operation. I'd say that more, I know from a Dear Evan Hansen side of things, like when we hold an open call, we really mean it. Like sometimes I think there's a concern that things like open calls that are for seeing everyone and not just appointments by by equity members and who've sort of arranged it through their agents with the casting offices, that it's more for optics and for press than for genuinely looking for talent. And I think across the board have seen that that's not really the case, and it can be like overwhelming to go to such things because they're big and there's a lot of people and it can be a long day. And but I have seen an amazing number of stories of someone who really has sort of been sort of plucked from those ranks and had amazing things sort of progress and happen. And I'd say one piece of advice that I've heard from friends and colleagues who work in casting, and sometimes they're the casting associates in the first line of defense, is also just being sort of so gracious and mindful and respectful of whoever you encounter, because sometimes there can be the mindset of, oh, I'm in with like the second assistant of this casting director for this, callback or whatever, and that doesn't really mean anything, or I'm not going to treat it the same as I would if it was the person whose name is on the door. And that's true in any sphere, but because you asked specifically about auditions, there's a lot of talented people, and a lot of it does come down to also sort of the human decency and the respect to those who you're in the room with, because a lot of times for us it'll be a casting associate and an associate director, an associate choreographer, who gets to see people before sort of the final decision makers can be in the room. But they'll have heard a lot of sort of reactions and perceptions before that, and you hope that it's just about the talent and the performance, but if someone goes in and is really kind of dismissive, that will carry up the chain too. So yeah, anyway, but thanks for your question, Steve.
From Allison, as work in New York starts to open up again, what are your thoughts on applying to positions there from out of state?
That is an awesome question. A very, very good question, Allison. And something I've even kind of touched on in workshops in the past, but I think it maybe has a whole different perspective now. There were years, 2 years ago, where we'd say to people who are applying, if you at all can do it in the realm of feasibility, put a New York address on your resume or cover letter. Because even if that you're able to get somewhere quickly and you're able to make it work and you have the couch to sleep on, if there are 20 resumes being waded through and it's a fast turnaround, and there's a person in Brooklyn and there's someone in DC or wherever, there is sadly going to be sort of that priority of who you think is going to come in first. And it's unfortunate that there are assumptions made, but it does happen sometimes. So that would have sort of been the previous advice. But it does feel like we're in a unique moment where things in this world are, starting to think about gearing up again, but they're also still mindful of how long it's going to be before they're really operating in person as normal. So anecdotally have definitely seen examples of people sort of jumping into things or sort of switching roles or opportunities and doing it from other places and sort of applying remotely. And I think there's an open-mindedness that's come out of that. I truly, I think we're still in that moment for now. I think it'll be interesting to see how long it lasts. And once people are settled back into their offices and back into normal, I think they might, um, some of those old opinions of who's going to be sort of the most accessible and how quickly might come back into play. But it does feel like we're in a unique moment to sort of capitalize on, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, going off of that, how do you think that the theater industry is maybe going to change post COVID with Broadway having been shut down, and how that might affect some of these jobs, their availability, or even kind of what their role now
Yeah,
requires of
I
them?
mean, that's such a huge conversation for sure. And there's a lot that could be said about the way that I think the theater world has taken this moment of pause and reckoning to think about inclusivity and sort of who's at those tables, not only on stage, but also behind the scenes and in the offices and on the crews and all of that. So I think that everyone is still sort of taking that moment of pause in an industry that goes so fast, to really think how a wider net can be cast and how to sort of find those people to come into these roles. And that is sort of a bigger topic for sure, speaking more specifically to some of the things that were talked about in this presentation and that I've kind of had a more direct hand in, is I think certain skill sets that have sort of come in to be a patch on things during this moment of pause are still going to be valued moving forward, because I think there's a lot of thought towards, everybody can't wait to get back into that theater and be back into that seat and have an audience around you. But there's also been a lot of mindfulness towards what the remote events and the virtual things have made accessible and have opened up for people to see performances they would have never had access to, or to attend benefits and fundraisers that usually would have been only if you were there in the room. So I think a lot of these organizations and theaters and producers are going to think about how to somehow keep that in the mix. And I think everyone's trying to figure out what that conversation means, because there's a lot of complicated implications to it all on so many sides of things. But I think some of those sort of skill sets that have come in are going, and who have helped make those things happen, um, are still going to be valued moving forward in kind of the same way they have been in this moment, and sort of working alongside what's happening in the theater.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're getting close to 4:30, so if anyone has any last questions, feel free to unmute and ask them or send them in. But thank you so much, Caitlin. This has been wonderful and very
Yeah, well,
informative. And thank you everyone else for
thank you everyone for
listening.
the really great questions. And yeah, Emma, thank you for being a wonderful moderator, and appreciate everyone who joined in. And yeah, any other questions, I'm glad to, I can leave my email in the chat actually. And I know it was a lot of information that was thrown out very quickly. Let me make sure I spelled that all right. But if there's anything that you wanted to follow up on, or you wanted to sort of see in more detail, or wanted a link again or anything like that, you can feel free to reach out via email, because I know it was covering a lot over the course of like 45 minutes. And yeah, anyway, but really grateful for everyone who joined today. And thank you again, Emma, for all your help.